Hey, I'm Nancy Cavey. I'm a Social Security disability and long-term disability attorney who represents those who have ME or chronic fatigue syndrome. Did you know that ME and chronic fatigue syndrome can impact over 1.5 to 2 million Americans, and at least 75% of those are women? In the course of my practice, I'm often asked to explain the five-step sequential evaluation. I want to dispel the mystery about the five-step sequential evaluation that's used by the Social Security Disability Administration in every claim and at every stage of a claim. The first question the Social Security Administration will ask is, have you been out of work for at least a year, or do you have a medical condition that would keep you out of work for at least a year? The second question they ask is, do you have what's called a severe medical condition? The third question they ask is whether your medical condition meets or equals a listing. The fourth question they ask is whether or not you can go back to your past relevant work. And the fifth question they ask is there any other work in the national economy that the applicant could do in view of their age, education, skills, and their restrictions and limitations? So let's break this down. Let's dispel the mystery behind the five-step sequential evaluation. As I said, the first question is, do you have a medical condition that will keep you out of work for at least a year, or have you been out of work for at least a year? Well, we know that the many symptoms of ME, CFS can prevent somebody from working, and those symptoms will include problems with post-exertional malaise, fatigue, problems from a cognitive standpoint, body pain, joint pain, mental confusion or fog, and even sometimes IBS symptoms. Those symptoms can be mild, they can be moderate, or as the disease progresses, they can get worse and they can become chronic. It really is important when you're applying for benefits to determine what stage you're at, because if you have a mild case of CFS, you quite frankly are not going to win. But as the disease progresses, your chances of winning become greater. And so the first question the Social Security Administration is going to ask, looking at your medical records, is does this condition prevent you from working? Have you been out of work for at least a year? And then, as I said, the second test is going to be the severity. Now, many times when I look at medical records, I just won't see the necessary information that will document the symptoms that I just mentioned. And more importantly, the records don't document how those symptoms impact someone's functionality. And so it's really crucial that your medical records document the fact that these symptoms are severe and incapacitating. And I'll talk about that a little more in a later series of videos. The third question the Social Security Administration asks is, do you meet or equal a medical listing? Well, there is no medical listing for chronic fatigue syndrome. While the Social Security Administration recognizes the disease, there just isn't any listing. Well, why is that important? That's important because if you met a listing or your medical condition equaled a listing, you would be automatically awarded your benefits at step 3 based on this medical listing. Unfortunately, as I said, while there isn't any listing, there are other complicating factors from a neurological standpoint, a cognitive standpoint, that may give rise to a listing level. But quite frankly, it's very difficult to equal a listing with chronic fatigue syndrome. The majority of these cases are decided at steps 4 and 5 of the five-step sequential evaluation. And to me, this is really the key that you have to understand. The first questions that we have to address at steps 4 and 5 are, what are your physical and cognitive abilities? Now, there is something called a residual functional capacity form that I'm going to discuss later, that I think is crucial to getting benefits awarded, because this form will address the questions of your functionality. The other half of this discussion at steps 4 and 5 are the vocational issues, because at step 4 the issue is, can you go back to the lightest and simplest job you held in the 15 years before you became disabled? And how you submit your initial application and your work history form can be crucial to establishing that you meet this test at step 4. Now, at step 5, there are 2 ways to meet this test, which is there any other work in the mythical, not real world national economy in view of your age, education, skills, and restrictions? Now, that's a mouthful. What do I mean by mythical, hypothetical, not real world? It does not matter whether you could find a job, keep a job, or even if the job would pay a living wage. None of that's relevant. What is relevant is whether there's another job in the national economy. Now, that means not just where you live, but anywhere in the United States. So many times I will have a vocational evaluator at trial say, well, Ms. Cavey, your client could be a carder. Do you know what a carder is? A carder takes the fuzzies off of a Polartec sweater. Well, I'm in Florida, and we don't have a Polartec factory, and we don't have the job of a carder. But that doesn't matter because it's a nationwide test. Now, the next issue is your age, and I will again discuss that in greater detail later because your age has a significant impact on whether you're awarded benefits. The next issue is whether you have any skills that you've learned from your other work that you could take to another job. So, for example, if you were a nurse, you have lots of skills that you could potentially take to other occupations, like, for example, being a on-call nurse that reviews admission issues, or to be like a peer review nurse. So there are sedentary nursing positions that potentially you could do based on your transferable skills. And the other factor, of course, is your education. The greater your education, the more difficult it becomes to get Social Security benefits. And so the key really is to show, based on your restrictions and limitations, your symptoms and your functionality, that there isn't any other work in the mythical, not real world national economy that you can do in view of your age, education, and skills. Now, there are 2 ways to meet the step 5, and this is where the majority of cases are decided. There is what we call gridding out, and there is also basically showing that you can't even engage in lighter sedentary work depending on your age on a full-time basis. Now, I will explain this in greater detail, but you need to understand that the steps 4 and 5 are rather complex, not only medically but vocationally. And so I really think that you should have an attorney to represent you in the entire Social Security disability claims process. When I represent someone, I want them to understand this 5-step sequential evaluation because we become a team. We become a team not only in terms of understanding what we need to prove, but in making sure that your medical records fully document the necessary indications about your symptoms and functionality, and we become a team working with your physician to get that residual functional capacity form filled out. In my view, it takes a team to get your Social Security disability benefits. I hope you've enjoyed this information about the 5-step sequential evaluation that's used in every Social Security case. I have written a book which I think is the go-to guide for Social Security disability applicants. You can order a complimentary copy of this by going to my website. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, contact us.